Welcome back to another episode of the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Kwangyin in Taipei. Last week, the U.S. re-elected President Donald Trump. Less than a day after the polls closed, President Trump won the Electoral College, and the Republicans also took the House and the Senate. My colleague, Silva Shih, CommonWealth's China and Defense correspondent, just came back from a reporting trip to the U.S. This was made possible by the Foreign Press Centers under the U.S. Department of State. And CommonWealth was the only media outlet from Taiwan joining this delegation. The tour brought together journalists from 36 countries who were divided into Team Red and Team Blue. And Silva, as part of Team Red, spent several days reporting from two pivotal cities in key battleground states, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Miami, Florida. Pundits had called this one of the closest races in recent history, but in the end, Trump delivered a landslide victory, outperforming 2016. So, what are Silva's interpretation of the results and predictions for the post-Trump world? We have a conversation with Silva on the ground. But unfortunately, due to the remote recording of this interview, there might be occasional variations in sound quality. Please bear with us. Now, let's dive into my conversation with Silva. Hi, Silva. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Okay. What time is it now in Miami?
So right now it's 7:41 in the morning, and I literally just slept for 2 hours.
Just 2 hours.
Yes.
How was last night?
It's overwhelmed and exhausted, and I went to the celebration party of the GOP.
What was that like?
It's crazy. People are super exciting and dressing all the stuff to celebrate.
Oh, wow. Was there a lot of booze flowing and a lot of cheers?
A lot of flags and cheering and literally everyone wearing the MAGA hat
Right.
to show their support of Trump.
Right. So they must be super excited that Trump is coming back. President Trump, I have to show some respect. So how do you feel covering the U.S. election this time?
Again, I feel overwhelmed and exhausted at the same time, but it's pretty interesting to have this rare opportunity to be in the States to cover these huge events.
Right. And where did you go for the rallies?
So about this tour, we have two stops. The first one is Milwaukee in Wisconsin and also Miami in Florida. So I went to the rallies of both Trump's and Harris at the Milwaukee in Wisconsin. So that's super interesting. So maybe I can start with the Trump's one. The Trump's one is in a stadium. It's huge and crowded. I think it's over 13,000 or 15,000-ish people to join the rally. And it literally is a concert. So the rally should be start at 6 p.m. And we expect Trump to show up on time, but he didn't. He showed up 3 hours later around 9. So from 6 to 9 p.m. is constantly non-stop music playing and everyone is singing with that. So it's
Really
huge concert. Right. So, but when Trump showed up at 9, it turns out a total different rally. I mean, people are cheer with Trump, and whatever Trump say, people will clap or just show their agreement with Trump's statement. So that's kind of interesting.
Oh,
While
okay.
in Harris event, I joined an event in Milwaukee. Harris didn't show up, but former President Clinton showed up. It's quite small. I mean, it's just 100 people to attend. That event is quite special because it's aiming to persuade more African Americans to stand out to vote for Harris. So most of the attendants are from the church or from a local community. So it's small, warm, not that crazy like the Trump's one, but you can tell the message from the two rallies are totally different. which is more like trying to get people angry about the current government. But on the other side, it's more like, hey, we should be stand together. We should be Harris supporter. Let's get out and get vote.
So, how persuasive did you think Bill Clinton was?
I have some reserve on that. The things about Bill
Right.
Clinton, he's still like the president that we used to be. No, I mean, but the message he sent is more unrelated to the current events. Like he will say he trying to fight for his grandson. He's trying to preserve the value of the society, the value of democracy. But from the feeling or statement I've heard on the ground, especially when I talk to the people on the street, most of the people, either in Milwaukee or in Miami, most of the people are concerned about economy, especially the inflation situation. So remember, Bill Clinton once said that stupid, the problem is economy. I think it's also related to the election this time, right?
Yeah. So we saw that Trump really created what we can say really a landslide victory. Was that within your expectation? Did anything happen that surprised you?
To be honest, before I landed in the States, probably I would say the result is beyond my expectation. But during the past weeks covering and touring, I would say yes, the result is within my expectation. I have two reasons. For one, like I said, that when I talk to people on the street, no matter their background, their like group, I mean, most of the people are so concerned about the inflation issue. And the most common phrase they will use is, I want to change, similar to the message and campaign that Obama once had. They want to change the current status. They want to control the inflation because they feel like, especially the rent and the price of daily products is getting too high. They want somebody can change this economic situation. And that's for the first reason. And the second reason is I can feel that most of the people are kind of like reserved on their opinion about like identity or their opinion about the war. So they feel like someone should be change the situation. Someone should stop the possibility of the World War III. So, I mean, it's also related to the concept of change.
Right. So people are feeling they're aggravated by the inflation problem. They think the cost of living are going out of control and that there's so many wars, including the one in Ukraine that has been going on for nearly about 3 years. And now we have the war on Gaza. And they believe that Trump is capable of ending these problems.
Probably not Trump, but I mean, because the message Harris sent out to the public is she will follow Biden administration, which sounds like to keep status quo. I mean, so if the other candidates try to very hard to emphasize he will not take whatever the current administration do, I mean, that's an opportunity to change.
Yeah, because it's, I guess, coming from the same party, it's been really hard for Harris to completely break away from President Biden. But was there anything that you heard from the street or from the delegation that surprised you about this election?
There are a couple of things I feel surprised that I read it on news, but I mean, when you talk people on the street in the States, it has more like color, more layers on the spot. I mean, for example, I feel like most of the young voters, especially male voters, are turn right and become more conservative. So the reason why of this trends or like change from the people I talk to is that they feel like all of the discussion about like transgender or gay rights or like transgender people can attend like women competition in the sports. They feel like it's too much for them, and some of them think the work culture is too far, so they want to leave a little bit back to the old days. So that's quite surprising me.
I see. So there's a backlash to against the wokeism.
And the other thing that I feel a little bit like overwhelmed is most of the people don't talk about like foreign affairs. I mean, I know the election is all about domestic election, but for us, I mean, for this press group, most of us are from 16 different countries around the world. We are so concerned about this election's implication or the impact to our own country. But we feel like kind of like disappointed because no one talk about foreign affairs, but the result gonna influence us. So I remember last night I talked to a Trump supporter, how he looks on like China and Taiwan. And he talks a lot, but he's the only one I met during the past week knows Taiwan and China relationship. So that's kind of a rare to find someone really like to follow the foreign affairs or like what happening around the world and trying to connect the international stuff with the domestic issue.
Right. So I really think that's the nature of all national elections. I remember when when we were covering Taiwan's presidential election, the issues that took center stage were also domestic problems like cost of living, cost of housing, and job opportunities and salaries. And I think a lot of foreign correspondents in Taiwan also pretty frustrated when people did not seem to care about cross-strait relations. And yeah, so I think you, as members of the delegation, the American people have spoken loud and clear to you by not paying too much attention to international affairs. I think that also points to a new direction. People are saying that U.S. is becoming more and more isolationist.
Yes, that's one way to interpret the trend. But most importantly, I think if you cannot make a living here, I mean, it's hard for you to think about other stuff. And the other thing is, if I see it from the perspective of the media landscape, most of the people today don't watch television or the so-called the mainstream media. So they don't follow their interests. So a lot of like young generation will pay attention to podcasts or watch something like live on Twitch. So if the media they follow don't talk about this stuff, they won't know what's happening around the world. I mean, probably we have to look into that factor at the same time.
Right, yeah. So that's increasingly people are turning to the echo chambers, and mainstream media are rendered less important now, really. So I would like to ask Silva this next question. So President Trump also won presidency 8 years ago, but this time around, he seems to be making a more resounding victory this time. What has changed about him or about the American society?
If we compare the so-called Trump 1.0 or the current like Trump 2.0, the biggest change is Trump has more experience about the national issue and also the foreign affairs. So when I attend the rallies in Milwaukee, you can tell that his confidence about the issue he's talking about. He's not saying something like a bystander. He knows stuff and this is his stance. But from the other side, about the supporter, I mean, compared with the 8 years ago, I mean, they become more aware of, we know what Trump looks like. We know Trump's behavior and his background, but we are okay with that. We still want to change. And Trump is the one who bring up all the issues that we care about. So no matter his background is not that very pretty, or he says something constantly not that very integrity or like positively, but people still trying to change their track.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that President Trump now has more experience than he had 8 years ago. So he is in some way the devil we know.
Yes.
So people
Good
already
point.
know how crazy he can become. So we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we will be talking about why Taiwan should care about this election result and what would Trump's re-election mean about Taiwan and China going forward. Welcome back to the Taiwanology podcast. This is your host, Liu Guangying. And online with us today is Silva, our coworker who is still in Miami now, covering the election. Right. So, Silva, we have talked about why you think that President Trump got reelected, but I think a lot of listeners might be wondering, why should people in Taiwan care about who is in the White House?
That's hugely important. Remember Trump during this campaign, he mentioned Taiwan at least twice or three times. He mentioned that Taiwan should pay protection fee. Taiwan has stolen the jobs of the USA and Taiwan has too many advanced chips, and he tried to fix that. So Taiwan's kind of like special from Trump's perspective. So that's why we definitely have to pay attention to the result of this election. So maybe people will be wondering like why Trump has to mention Taiwan so many times, especially what does the protection fee means? He even say mob will have protection fee as well. So what does that mean? So before this election, I have talked to a lot of like scholars and also like officials from the US side and Taiwan side as well. I think there's a key figure that people have to pay attention to behind the phrase of protection fee, and that is the US national debt. The national debt of the US is now more than 35 trillion, which is a historical record. So that means that any issue that related to like the fee and about economic is quite huge and important for the US side. So let's try to explain what this protection fee might be. I mean, for one, from the perspective on the defense issue that people most care about in Taiwan is that are we going to buy more weapons? Are we going to increase our budget of the defense? I mean, yes, probably both of them are true. That doesn't mean the US won't protect Taiwan per se, but if we try to let the US side to stand with us, maybe we have to pay what we have to do. I mean, for some people in the state will think that you have to show that you are prepared as well. That means you probably have to buy more weapons and including like drones or like other advanced weapons. But the issue for Taiwan is, yes, we definitely like to buy more advanced weapons, but will the US side has enough products and capacity to provide us after? Because right now the huge issue between Taiwan and US in terms of the weapon sales is that we are still in the waiting to have more weapons to come to Taiwan because there are another war happening, like Ukraine war and the Gaza thing. So yeah, and all of the weapons are in kind of like sent to the battlefield. So for Taiwan, we are still waiting for our orders. That's for one thing. The other side of the protection fee would be the trade issue, especially that Trump has already announced that he will have tariff against China and the world as well. So what does that mean? That means
Yeah,
that,
because Taiwan has a huge trade surplus against US.
right. So for Trump, I think he's trying to have the balanced trade relationship of the bilateral relationship. So he tried to make every trade even. I mean, I use the word even. That's what I constantly heard on the street or from the scholar. And yeah, quote unquote even. So that's the thing that we should be, as a Taiwanese, we should be also taking into consideration when he talk about the protection fee. So this will also related to the semiconductor industry and why Trump so emphasized on bringing manufacturing back home, back to the US, because for the US side, is an important issue to try a different approach to fix the national debt issue.
Right. So, first of all, the protection fee is to tell Taiwan that if you want our protection, you have to do some hard work as well. You cannot just sit there and wait for our protection when push comes to shove. And also for manufacturing, Taiwan, who manufactures so much of the advanced chips, you cannot expect to monopolize the entire pie anymore. You have to maybe share a slice of the pie with us, American workers. You have to create some jobs locally in the US. I think that's going to be even more prevalent going forward.
Right. So there's one thing I just want to add up on the semiconductor stuff. So not only people care about that Taiwan make too much like advanced chips. I talked to several like professor and people in the think tank in the US side. I'm quite surprised that they also think that the tension and the possibility of the war across the straits might endanger the supply of the chips and the high advanced semiconductor. So that's why they're trying to move the production of the semiconductor in Taiwan away and to the States. So we have to take the risk of the cross-strait into consideration when we talk about the chips.
Right. And that's why I think news broke also last week that SpaceX is telling its suppliers to manufacture outside of Taiwan and China. Otherwise, they will get no more orders. I think that's what a lot of companies are saying as well. Right. So, this is why people in Taiwan should care about President Trump. And I do think we have to really pay close attention to his policies and if he follows his words. So, next, I think people also care about US China relations, which have been, I would say, on ice for a few years ever since the pandemic. What do you see going forward that President Trump is coming back, the president who started the US China trade war? What's your prospect?
So that's also an important issue that Taiwan should be pay attention to about China's reaction or China's movement toward the result of the US election. So remember this year, a very well-known scholarship from Beijing, he wrote a piece on the foreign policy. The main thing about the article is that no matter who will win the election this time, Beijing will acknowledge that the relationship between China and US will not turning back, which means we're not turning back to those good old days. So they are prepared to the fierce competition among the two countries. So I think that's a heads up for everyone that no matter Harris or Trump wins, I mean, they will do whatever they're gonna do, try to prepare themselves to, I mean, they will do whatever they have to do. And the other thing is about the possible, like, the tension and the risk of the war. I mean, people will always say we'll have a time frame like 2027, 2025. So, but at this moment, I think Beijing are still trying to adjust the new administration. So they're trying to build a new channel with the new administration of the Trump. So maybe we can wait and see how they interact with the new government, with the new president, and probably we will know that in what approach that Beijing trying to build with the states. And the third thing about the forthcoming US-China relationship is definitely about the trade and the tech competition. I remember I went to China last month to cover the
Made in
result
China
and the state.
2025.
Yeah, Make in China 2025. So it's quite surprising that most of the goals listed on the Made in China 2025, it looks like China really made it. But this is for the current stage. I mean, so if we look forward to next 5 or 10 years, if the competition between two countries are still going fierce and even get worse, I mean, maybe they are unable to made in China like 2035. So what if that's really a choke point for the Beijing, for the China? What's the reaction they will do? I mean, we should pay attention to that as well.
Right. So for listeners, I really recommend that you go back to the episode about the Made in China 2025 cover story and also go to CommonWealth English for the excellent cover story that Silva did. Well, after this conversation, I'm not feeling less worried. I should tell you. I'm getting more and more worried about what's going forward. But luckily, we still have you, Silva, soldiering on in Miami. Right. So, are you already at the end of this trip?
Not yet. We still have 2 more days because we have to learn more about the reaction and how people think on the ground about this election. I feel like it's quite interesting to learn the whole process of the election and to talk to people before the election, during the election, and after the election. You will make me more feel like understanding like why people chose Trump as their presidency. I mean.
So I think opportunities like this that really keep us going as journalists on the ground. That's really it's really a great opportunity to be down there. I think we applaud you for your great work. And finally, just something, let's say, less serious. So we know that you are part of a delegation of 36 people, and your delegation has 16 people from 16 different countries?
Right.
Oh, okay. What's that like, and what kind of questions did they ask you?
So we are a bunch of like reporter. Most of us are covering like foreign affairs and defense, and we are from like for me from Taiwan, and the other fellows from like Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany, and like people around like Asia, Africa, and Europe as well. So whenever we sit down and talk about this election, the common topic we will share is about the war because we have several people from Europe. So they will discuss about the Ukraine war and will the new president going to end the war soon? And then when we finish the Ukraine war, they will turn to me. What about Taiwan? They feel like Taiwan is on the team with the Poland and Czech Republic. So we feel like we are more concerned about the situation in Ukraine, in Gaza, and what's the implication to Taiwan. So that's why people are all curious about Taiwan reaction to this election.
And what did you tell them?
I constantly say that I'm worried about this result as well, but we have to adapt that. We will learn from our previous experience. So, I mean, that's the only stuff we can do to adapt the new situation.
Right. Because the world is changing, and now we have a second term of President Trump. And Silva, thank you so very much for talking with us. And I would not keep you from going back on the streets and do your reporting and get your opinions from the Americans who have just voted. And I can't wait to have a beer with you when you come back.
Yes, definitely. I need wine, alcohol to get relaxed. I mean, to get rid of the election.
Okay, right. Guaranteed. So thank you very much, Silva, and you have a very good rest of your trip.
Thank you.
Good. So, yeah, that was Silva from Miami reporting on the ground on the US election. So, that wraps up today's episode. If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to leave a review or shoot us an email. To read more in depth reports on how Taiwan views the new US president, please visit CommonWealth English website. Our next episode will be available November 26th. This show is produced and edited by Yayuan Zhang and Weiru Wang. I'm your host, Liu Guangyin. Follow Taiwanology wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.